It was really good for me to meet them because I really admired them from the recording work that they'd done. They're definitely from the same school I come from.
Finally, the truth about Jimmy Page is emerging. He concealed himself behind his guitar prowess for half a century. However, the secrets are too significant to be hidden. Narratives concerning the actual events of those Led Zeppelin tours, the inappropriate connections, and the actions that even rock musicians were startled by. It was necessary to lock hotel rooms from the outside. Little girls were kept out of sight. Is still dealing with the fallout at the age of 81. The music industry is shocked to learn that this is not the Jimmy Page they were accustomed to. Jimmy Page was born in Heston, Middlesex, on January 9, 1944, in the midst of World War II. His father was employed at a plastic coatings plant as an industrial personnel manager, while his mother worked as a secretary for a doctor. They were a middle-class, steady family. He attended Ewell County Secondary School after attending Epsom County Pound Lane Primary School. Nobody could have predicted that this youngster would grow up to contribute to some of the loudest and most important rock songs ever recorded. He had a normal, safe upbringing. When he turned 12, everything changed. While traveling home, Jimmy came across a Spanish guitar. It triggered something inside of him, but no one knew where it originated from or who had left it there. He developed an obsession with Elvis Presley, particularly with the guitarists he performed with, such as James Burton and Scotty Moore. He was also a fan of Jerry Lee Lewis, Little Richard, and Lonnie Donegan. Jimmy read instructions and listened to records to learn how to play. He discovered icons like Sleepy John Estes, Arthur Big Boy Crudup, Muddy Waters, and Howlin' Wolf, while tracing the origins of rockabilly music back to its blues roots. He wrote years later of his trip to Tupelo, the hometown of Elvis Presley, and claimed that it required Elvis's intellect to combine those influences and transform the world. For Jimmy, this was more than a pastime. The musical vision that will shape his life began at that time. A young Jimmy made an appearance on the BBC's All Your Own in April 1958 as a member of the J.G. Group Skiffle. When the episode was filmed, he was just 13 years old. He mentioned on radio that he wanted to be a musician, but that if a cure for cancer wasn't found by the time he grew up, he would be interested in finding one. This TV moment had him performing for the first time in front of a national audience, during the height of the skiffle craze in Britain at the time. Although it was only a minor step, it gave him hope that music could carry him far beyond his West Ewell school. Jimmy had to make a decision as a teenager. While he was being drawn more and more into music, his parents thought he would choose the safer route in science. Although he attended Sutton Art College, he played in bars and on street corners most of the time. At the age of 19, he made the decision to dedicate his life to music in 1963. Although he acknowledged that he was unsure of his chances of success, he was certain that he wanted to be involved. Jimmy was one of the busiest session guitarists in London by the middle of the 1960s, sometimes working 3 recording sessions per day. 6 days a week, he was able to play acoustic guitar, rockabilly, blues, and even harmonica. Because he could quickly adjust to anything, producers adored him. To distinguish him from Big Jim Sullivan, other musicians dubbed him Lil Jim P. In addition to earning him money, this continuous labor taught him all there is to know about recording and producing music skills that would come in handy later. Jimmy was frequently used as a backup guitarist for bands whose main guitarist was unable to complete a recording. He occasionally performed uncredited on early Kinks and Who songs. Pete Townshend was hesitant to let him play, but Jimmy nevertheless showed up on the B-side, Bald-Headed Woman, for reasons I cannot explain. Because of this behind-the-scenes work, most people were unaware that his guitar was used on numerous well-known albums. At the age of 20, Jimmy played guitar at Abbey Road Studio One in August 1964, while Shirley Bassey's Goldfinger theme was being recorded. He saw her perform the song flawlessly in a single take before collapsing, after so much time spent holding the last note. Additionally, this was his first collaboration with John Paul Jones, who would go on to join Led Zeppelin. Whether Jimmy played on the main version or merely the instrumental is up for question, but the session connected him to one of the most well-known movie themes ever. Jimmy contributed to many popular songs throughout the 1960s, including Joe Cocker's With a Little Help from My Friends, Petula Clark's Downtown, Donovan's Sunshine Superman, and Marianne Faithfull's As Tears Go By. Among many others, he collaborated with the Rolling Stones. In the studio industry, confidentiality was crucial. Jimmy frequently didn't know who would enter the session until they did, and musicians didn't discuss which songs they performed on. He gained a thorough understanding of the business throughout these years, and he eventually made the contacts necessary to start one of the most successful bands in rock history. Jimmy Page was originally brought in to play bass when he joined the Yardbirds in June 1966. That was short-lived. In a matter of weeks, he and Jeff Beck were sharing lead guitar responsibilities, forming one of the most dynamic guitar duos in rock history. Happenings 10 Years Time Ago, which was recorded between July and September 1966, was their best-selling song. In ways that no one else had attempted, the two guitars blend together. However, the magic was erratic. Later on, Page acknowledged that although some nights were flawless, others broke down when the components didn't work together. He would be following the plan, but Beck would be going in a completely different direction. The band ended up performing on a movie set that year instead on a stage. They received an invitation from Michelangelo Antonioni to feature in his critically acclaimed film, Blow Up. In one scenario, Beck mimics Pete Townshend's well-known on-stage devastation by smashing his guitar after an amp blows. The Yardbirds accepted the assignment after The Who declined. Later, Page recollected the bizarre experience of viewing the completed movie. They ended up waiting in line like everyone else to see themselves on TV, despite never having received an invitation to any premieres. Nevertheless, the event turned into one of the few captured times on film, where viewers could truly see the guitar combination between Beck and Page. By 1968, the Yardbirds were exhausted from touring non-stop. Keith Relf and Jim McCarty, who had been there since 1963, were worn out. Page still intended to push the band into louder rock, but they wanted to slow down and experiment with more acoustic, folk-inspired stuff. Their last performances in the United States took place on May 31 and June 1 at the Shrine Auditorium in Los Angeles, and then on June 4 and 5 in Alabama. These performances recorded a band on the brink and were ultimately released on a bootleg dubbed Last Rave Up in L.A. They formally announced McCarty and Relf's exits on June 12. On July 7, 1968, the Yardbirds played their final gig in Bedfordshire's Luton. Before the end of that chapter, Page had a big dream. In his ideal supergroup, Beck and he would play guitars, Keith Moon would play drums, John Entwistle would play bass, and Steve Winwood or Steve Marriott would sing. It was more than a dream. The plan was thwarted by contracts, schedule conflicts, and personal matters. Although Page, Beck, and Moon had previously performed together on Beck's Bolero in 1966 with future Zeppelin bassist John Paul Jones. The Who were busy, Moon was erratic, and Beck was off pursuing a solo career. That ideal band never materialized. But Page was inspired to start Led Zeppelin by their failure. Page and bassist Chris Dreja still had contracts for Yardbirds performances after McCarty and Ralph left. They had to cancel or face legal repercussions. Page had to rapidly assemble a new band, and they even went on tour in Sweden and Denmark as the Yardbirds with Jimmy Page. He was able to hire John Bonham, John Paul Jones, and Robert Plant as a result of this rush. The new band's first official performance as Led Zeppelin took place at Surrey University on October 25, 1968. Page recorded the fact that they were paid 175s in his appointment book, a modest price for what turned out to be a momentous evening. Robert Plant was virtually absent from the scene. Terry Reid was Page's first pick for a singer. Alongside the Beatles and the Stones, Aretha Franklin, then 19 years old, once referred to one of the only three things occurring in England. However, Reid didn't want to sabotage the Stones' American tour, which he already had arranged. Rather, he suggested Bonham and Plant. Although Reid claimed he never regretted his decision, his suggestion helped to influence rock history. Early Led Zeppelin rehearsals were held in a repurposed boathouse at Pangbourne on the Thames. In 1967, Page used his funds as a session guitarist to purchase it for $6,000. The space included flawless acoustics, oak floors, and a view of the river. For a group that combined heavy rock, psychedelic, and blues, Page sparked immediate excitement when he played The Whole Lotta Love to the Others riff for the first time. In those months, Plant's life had taken a significant turn. He had been living out of a suitcase and performing in small local bands for more than a year prior to joining. Going from almost poverty to touring Scandinavia was a requirement for joining Zeppelin, and taking a plane abroad in a few weeks. The contrast stuck with him and eventually served as inspiration for his work with Wolverhampton's homeless charity. The music industry was permanently altered on November 11, 1968, when Led Zeppelin signed a record deal with Atlantic Records. Unheard of at the time, the label had no creative influence over their debut album, because it was already entirely recorded when they signed. Under the terms of the deal, Jimmy Page's business, Super Hype Tapes Limited, was allowed to replace any band member with the exception of Page. Page was the only one who signed the contract. The band received a royalty rate of 7.33% in the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, and 5.5% in other nations. The band had complete control over tour dates, record design, release schedule, and even which songs would be singles. But Atlantic was only allowed to issue 2 greatest hits albums annually. They notably disregarded all industry regulations by refusing to release any singles. The band also used Roman numerals to create a distinctive album name style. January 1969 saw the release of their debut album, followed by October 1969's Led Zeppelin the Second, 1970's Led Zeppelin the Third, and November 1971's untitled Led Zeppelin, the Fourth. That last one only had 4 symbols on the cover, no name or content. Page refused to turn over the tapes unless the label consented, despite Atlantic Records' distaste for the idea and their warning that it could ruin their career. The album went on to become one of the all-time best-selling records. At least 665 metal albums use the numeral 3 alone, demonstrating how the Roman numeral concept impacted hundreds of bands later. Jimmy Page likewise viewed FM radio's ascent as a significant possibility. FM was beginning to play entire album sides, whereas AM radio mainly played short singles. The tracks that Page recorded blended together to provide extended listening experiences that were ideal for FM's style. Before the band ever arrived, manager Peter Grant created anticipation by sending advance copies of their debut album to FM stations in the locations they would tour. Despite never being issued as a single in the United States, this contributed to Stairway to Heaven becoming the most requested FM radio song ever. By 1973, they were surpassing the Beatles' previous records. Their performance in Atlanta on May 4th drew 49,000 fans, a significantly higher number than the Beatles' record of 33,000. They surpassed the Beatles' historic Shea Stadium audience of 55,000 by drawing 57,000 fans the next day in Tampa. At the time, that performance earned $309,000, the highest amount ever earned by a rock event. They set a record for a single-act indoor concert in 1977, when they performed for 76,000 people in the Pontiac Silverdome and made $642,000 in a single night. Rock was irrevocably altered by Page's recording methods in the studio. He felt that distance equaled depth rather than putting microphones directly in front of amplifiers or isolating drums in dead rooms. To record the sound of the room, he frequently placed microphones 20 feet away. By flipping the tape while recording, he also employed reverse echo, in which the echo appeared before the primary sound, to make it obvious that the sound was his invention and not theirs. He switched engineers for every record. Outside of music, Page developed an obsession with Aleister Crowley, an occultist. He purchased Boleskine House, where Crowley had resided from 1899 to 1913, on the shores of Loch Ness in 1970. Crowley's papers, clothes, and other items were also gathered by Page. He also had a portion of Crowley's well-known slogan engraved into the groove of Led Zeppelin III. He owned an occult bookstore called the Equinox, named after Crowley's journal, and a home in London called the Tower House, which has long been associated with ghostly tales. Page became friends with filmmaker Kenneth Anger because of their mutual interest in Crowley. Anger conducted an exorcism for Page at Boleskine in 1973. Later, while working on Anger's film Lucifer Rising, Page allowed Anger to edit a Led Zeppelin concert video in the basement of his London home. In 1976, their friendship fell apart when offering unapproved tours to visitors caused Rage to be thrown out of the house. Then, in a public insult, Anger said that he had cursed Page with the curse of King Midas, which would freeze his career and make his success into nothing. Later, several fans blamed this curse for Plant's bad luck and Zeppelin's downfall. The band's past was likewise tainted by violence. After a festival employee warned Peter Grant's 10-year-old son not to take down a sign, a brawl broke out on July 23, 1977, during the day on the Green Festival in Oakland. In a matter of minutes, security guard Jim Downey was being attacked by John Bonham, Peter Grant, tour manager Richard Cole, and security worker John Bindon. All four were eventually taken into custody by the police. Each of them posted $250 bond after being charged with violence. They were led into the station with jackets over their heads as Grant yelled angrily during the arrests, which were captured on camera for television. Jimmy Page's life in the 1970s was filled with both profoundly disturbing tales and amazing music. During Led Zeppelin's North American tour in June 1972, Jimmy Page, then 28 years old, met 14-year-old Lori Maddox in the Hyatt House Hotel in Los Angeles. He introduced himself as Jimmy when he first spotted her near the pool. Peter Grant, the band's manager, discovered her at the Rainbow Bar and Grill that evening, loaded her into a limousine, and drove her to Page's hotel. She later claimed that she lost her virginity to him on this particular night. The connection was unlawful at the time, as California's consent age was 18. Grant frequently kept her locked in hotel rooms with security personnel to conceal it. Page would call her every day from England and occasionally take Led Zeppelin's private aircraft back to Los Angeles just to see her. The two-year romance ended in 1975 when she was 16 years old. When she discovered him in bed with model Baby Buell, it was over. Many people think that the Led Zeppelin song Sick Again, which has a line about turning 16, was inspired by their time together. Before that, Charlotte Martin came into Page's life. She met him on his 26th birthday in January 1970, following a performance at the Royal Albert Hall. She was born Catherine Martin in Paris. She had dated George Harrison for a short time and Eric Clapton once. On March 24, 1971, their daughter Scarlett was born, and Page referred to her as "My Lady." Living in London's music and art scene, Charlotte had converted herself from a rigid Parisian upbringing into a free spirit. Before they split up in the early 1980s, she remained with Page for more than 10 years. Throughout the height of Led Zeppelin's popularity, she later turned to painting, producing pieces that explored her connections to 1960s culture and her desire to escape her upbringing. On tour, Page's destructive tendencies were so extreme that the crew would occasionally confine him to hotel restrooms. To keep him from ruining the place, groupies were left to keep an eye on him. He did a great deal of damage. In 1977, while staying at the Edgewater Hotel in Seattle, he hurled televisions out of 5 separate rooms. Due of their past, the band booked accommodations under false names. Additionally, he would go to transvestite bars, where he would do drugs with drag queens and dress in Nazi uniforms. Sometimes the only way to enjoy a peaceful night is to shackle him, according to road manager Richard Cole. One of the most well-known groupies of the time, Pamela Desbars, claimed that Page frequently dressed in Nazi garb, both in public and privately. He even donned what he described as a stormtrooper outfit, which resembled a Nazi uniform on stage in Chicago in 1977. He kept going to underground clubs, combining with drug abuse and progressively unpredictable conduct. Property was not the only constraint on the crew. They were attempting to prevent hazardous and harmful public scenes. While bidding on Aleister Crowley objects at a Sotheby's auction in 1973, Page ran across filmmaker Kenneth Anger. They started collaborating on Lucifer Rising, Anger's movie. Page pledged to write the entire soundtrack, but he only produced 20 minutes of music, much less than the required 40 minutes. Later, Anger claimed that Page was unable to follow through because he was constantly high on heroin. Their argument became sour, with Anger accusing him of being cursed. David Bowie started to believe Page was employing black magic against him at about the same time. Bowie kept bowls of urine all throughout his house, had his pool exorcised, and drew pentagrams on his walls as a result of his paranoia. When Robert Plant's family's rented car collided with a tree on August 4, 1975, their Rhodesian vacation became a catastrophe. Plant suffered fractures to his elbow, foot bones, and ankle. Maureen, his wife, sustained injuries to her face, a shattered leg, 4 damaged pelvic bones, and a fractured head. Their daughter Carmen fractured her wrist, while their son Karak broke his leg. Because of the island's inadequate medical system, a private jet carrying doctors was dispatched to return them to London. Physicians even warned Plant that he might never be able to walk again. Their American tour, which had already sold 110,000 tickets for 2 performances at Oakland Stadium, had to be canceled due to this disaster. Numerous other stadium dates in Kansas City, Los Angeles, and other places were also postponed. It was a loss of millions. Just as the band had surpassed the Beatles' attendance record in 1973, it also halted their progress. The curse story of Kenneth Anger reappeared in 1976. Like the mythological King Midas, he said, Page's greed and untrustworthiness would destroy all he touched. Later, occult scholars proposed that this curse was a component of the negative energy that surrounded the band's tragedy.